The first sound Mara Vance heard after the twins were born wasn't joy, it was silence. Not the soft, sacred kind that cradles new life. This was the silence of a room holding its breath, waiting for permission to condemn. The midwife's hands froze mid-reach. The neighbor woman who'd been boiling water turned her face to the wall. Even the fire seemed to pull back its warmth, leaving the cabin cold as a crypt. Mara lay in the narrow bed, soaked through with sweat and blood, her body screaming from the violence of bringing two lives into the world at once. She didn't need to see their faces to know something had shifted. She felt it in the air, thick and wrong, like the moment before a hanging. "Let me see them," she whispered. The midwife, a woman named Cora Finch, who'd delivered half the babies in the territory, didn't move. Her lips pressed into a bloodless line. "Cora," Mara's voice cracked, "let me see my children." Cora's eyes flicked toward the door, then back. She wrapped both infants quickly, too quickly, in rough cloth that smelled of lye and smoke. When she finally placed them in Mara's arms, her touch was careful, distant, like she was handling something contaminated. Mara looked down. Two tiny faces, eyes squeezed shut, fists curled tight. "One boy, one girl," the midwife had murmured. But that wasn't what Cora was seeing. That wasn't what made the neighbor woman cross herself and back toward the door. The twins' skin was pale, not sickly, not weak, just pale in a way that didn't match Mara's olive complexion or Caleb's sun-weathered tan. Their hair, what little there was, came in fine and light as corn silk. And their eyes, when the boys flickered open for just a second, were a shade of blue so clear it looked almost colorless. Nothing about them was wrong, but everything about them was different. And in a town like Coldwater Ridge, different was damning. "Where's Caleb?" Mara asked, pulling the twins closer to her chest. They were warm, real, hers. "Someone get my husband." Cora wiped her hands on her apron, slow and deliberate, like she was buying time. "He's been sent for." "Sent for?" Mara's heart kicked against her ribs. "He should be here. He was supposed to—" The door banged open. Caleb Vance stepped inside, and the cold came with him. Snow dusted his shoulders. His jaw was set in that way Mara had learned to read over 3 years of marriage. Locked down, immovable, already decided. Behind him came 2 other men. Samuel Driscoll, the town clerk, a weasel of a man who kept the records and never missed a chance to remind people of his authority, and Sheriff Howell, broad-shouldered and stone-faced, his hand resting on the grip of his pistol like he expected trouble. Mara's stomach dropped. "Caleb?" Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. "What's happening?" He didn't look at her. He looked at the bundles in her arms. His face didn't change. No softness, no curiosity. Just a cold, empty stare, like he was examining livestock that didn't meet standards. "Let me see them," he said flatly. She hesitated. Some instinct, old and animal, told her not to. But he was her husband, the father. She shifted the twins slightly so he could see their faces. Caleb stared for a long, terrible moment. Then he stepped back. "They're not mine." The words landed like a shovel hitting frozen ground. Mara's breath caught. "What?" "You heard me." His voice was steady, rehearsed. "Those aren't my children." "Caleb, that's—" She tried to sit up, but her body betrayed her, weak and shaking. "That's insane. You know that's insane." "I know what I see." He turned to the sheriff. "I want her out." Howell's expression didn't shift. He'd heard worse, done worse. This was just another entry in the ledger of a man's rights over his household. "You're sure about this, Vance?" "I'm sure." Mara's heart slammed against her ribs. "Caleb, look at me. Look at me." Her voice cracked, desperate now. "You know me. You know I would never— I don't know anything anymore." He finally met her eyes, and there was nothing in them. No love, no doubt. Just cold certainty, the kind that's already written the story and doesn't care about facts. "You brought shame into this house. I won't carry it." "This is madness," Mara's voice rose, shrill and raw. "These are your children. I've been nowhere, done nothing. You know that." "Enough." Sheriff Howell stepped forward, his boots heavy on the floorboards. "Mrs. Vance, under territorial law, a man has the right to refuse claim of progeny if legitimacy is in question." "Legitimacy?" She almost laughed. It came out broken. I've been locked in this house for months. Where exactly do you think I... The law doesn't require proof. Driscoll cut in, his voice slick and practiced. Only reasonable suspicion. And given the unusual appearance of the infants combined with your husband's testimony, the matter is settled. Mara stared at him, at all of them. This wasn't a question. This wasn't a trial. This was a script they'd already written, and she was just the body they were moving through the motions. You can't do this, she whispered. We can, Howell said, and we are. You'll be escorted beyond town limits by dawn. Take what you can carry. Leave the rest. It's winter. Her voice cracked. It's the dead of winter. I just gave birth. I can't... You should have thought of that before you disgraced your marriage. The midwife flinched but said nothing. The neighbor woman was already gone. Even Cora, who'd known Mara since she was a girl, who'd helped her through every sickness and scrape, couldn't meet her eyes now. Mara looked at Caleb one more time, searching, begging without words. He turned his back. Be ready in 2 hours, Howell said. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. They left. All of them. The door shut with a soft final click, and Mara was alone with 2 sleeping infants and a body that could barely sit upright. She didn't cry, not yet. Crying was a luxury she couldn't afford. Her mind raced, stumbling over itself, trying to find a foothold in a world that had just collapsed. 2 hours. She had 2 hours to gather a life, to prepare for exile into a wilderness that killed stronger people in kinder seasons. Her hands shook as she laid the twins carefully on the bed. They stirred but didn't wake. Fragile. Perfect. Hers. She forced herself to stand. Pain shot through her abdomen, sharp and vicious, but she gritted her teeth and moved. There wasn't time for weakness. The cabin was small. 1 room, a loft, a root cellar. Everything she and Caleb had built in 3 years of hard marriage. The quilt her mother had sewn. The table Caleb had planed himself. The shelf of preserves she'd put up last summer, thinking she'd need them come spring when the baby arrived. Baby. Singular. She'd expected one. She pulled a canvas sack from the corner and started filling it. Cloth diapers. She grabbed all of them. A spare dress, her shawl, a tin cup, a knife, matches. Her hands moved automatically, her brain somewhere else, still trying to make sense of the senseless. Why? That was the question that kept circling. Why would Caleb do this? He wasn't a warm man, but he wasn't cruel. He'd wanted a family. He'd said so, hadn't he? Or had she just assumed? Had she ever really known him? Or had she married a stranger because that's what women did when they ran out of options? And the town. Driscoll. Howell. They'd come too fast, too prepared, like they'd been waiting. She stopped, her hand frozen on a jar of pickled beets. No. They hadn't been waiting for her specifically. They'd been waiting for an excuse. Any excuse. Because Coldwater Ridge wasn't a town, it was a machine. And machines didn't care about people. They cared about order, about control, about making sure everyone stayed in their place and no one asked questions. She'd just given them the perfect reason to tighten the screws. Mara shoved the jar into the sack. She grabbed a wool blanket, a second shirt, a pair of Caleb's old gloves he'd left hanging by the door. She didn't care if it was stealing. He'd stolen more. The twins started to fuss, soft mewling sounds, the beginning of hunger. She had maybe an hour before they'd need to feed, and after that she didn't know. Her body was producing milk. She could feel the ache, but she was weak and stress could dry her up fast. She needed a plan. But what plan could survive this? She had no family in the territory, no friends close enough to risk sheltering her, no money, no property in her own name. The law said she was nothing now. A woman without a husband was barely a person. A woman accused of adultery, even without proof, was worse than nothing. The door opened again. Mara spun, clutching the knife she'd packed. It was Cora. The midwife stepped inside quickly, shutting the door behind her. Her face was tight, pale, but her eyes were sharp. She crossed the room and pressed a small bundle into Mara's hands. Dried meat, hardtack, a blanket I can't account for. Her voice was low, fast. There's a forest road 7 miles north, follows the ridge. If you can make it that far, there's a trapper's shack another 3 miles in. It might be empty this time of year. Mara stared at her. Cora, don't thank me. I can't help more than this. Cora glanced at the twins. Her expression softened just for a second. They're healthy. Small, but healthy. Keep them warm. Keep them fed. Don't let them cry if you can help it. Sound carries. Why are you doing this? Cora's jaw tightened. Because I've delivered 100 babies in this town, and I've seen what happens to the ones born inconvenient. She met Mara's eyes. This isn't the first time. It won't be the last. But maybe you're stubborn enough to survive it. She turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. Don't trust the main road. They'll be watching it. And don't go south. That's where the enforcers patrol. North is your only shot. Then she was gone. Mara stood there, clutching the bundle, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might crack a rib. 10 miles. She had to cover 10 miles in the snow, at night, with 2 newborns and a body that could barely walk. It was impossible. She looked down at the twins, Elias and Rhea. She'd named them in her head during the pregnancy, back when she still thought the world would let her keep them. Okay, she whispered. Okay, we're going to live. You hear me? We're going to live. She didn't know if she believed it, but she said it anyway. The settlement of Coldwater Ridge sat at the edge of civilization like a fist clenched against the wilderness. It wasn't a large town, maybe 200 souls if you counted generously and included the outlying homesteads. But it was organized, orderly, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business. And that wasn't an accident. It was built that way. The main street ran straight as a rifle shot. The general store, the land office, the sheriff's station, the church. Every building faced the street. Every door visible from every other door. No privacy, no shadows. Just the constant grinding pressure of being seen. And at the center of it all, pulling strings like a puppeteer with 6 hands, was a network of men who'd learned long ago that power didn't come from guns or gold. It came from paper. Records, deeds, certificates of birth and death and marriage. The words that turned people into property and property into wealth. Samuel Driscoll knew this better than anyone. He sat now in his office above the land registry, a cramped room that smelled of ink and old leather, and watched the snow fall outside the window. His desk was covered in ledgers, neat, precise rows of names and dates and transactions. Everything accounted for, everything controlled, except for the one entry he'd just made. Mara Vance, expelled. Cause, moral failure. Witnesses, Caleb Vance, Sheriff T. Howell, midwife C. Finch. He dipped his pen and signed his name beneath it. The ink dried fast in the cold air. A knock at the door. Come. Sheriff Howell stepped inside, shaking snow from his coat. He was a big man, the kind whose size did most of his talking for him. But he wasn't stupid. Driscoll had worked with him long enough to know that. It's done, Howell said. She'll be out by dawn. Driscoll nodded. Any trouble? None. She's too weak to fight, and she's got no one to fight for her. He paused. You sure this was necessary? Driscoll looked up, his expression flat. You questioning me? No, just asking. Then don't. Driscoll closed the ledger with a soft thump. The Vance claim is valuable. Prime water access, timber rights, and a clean deed. Caleb's family has held it for 2 generations, but Caleb's weak, no spine. If he'd kept the woman and the bastards, he'd have lost the land within 5 years, either to debt or to her family making claims. She doesn't have family. She would have found some. Driscoll stood, crossing to the window. People like her always do. And then we'd have a mess. Competing claims, legal challenges, chaos. He turned back. This way, it's clean. Caleb remains compliant, the land stays in reliable hands, and we remove a variable. Howell grunted. What about the kids? What about them? They'll freeze, or starve, or both. Driscoll shrugged. Not our concern. The law was followed. That's all that matters. Howell stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. If you say so. I do. Driscoll sat back down, already reaching for the next ledger. Close the door on your way out. Howell left. Driscoll worked for another hour, updating records, adjusting entries, making sure the story was airtight. It wasn't cruelty, it was maintenance. The town ran on order, and order required sacrifice. Mara Vance was just the latest. There would be others. There always were. Mara's first steps into the snow felt like walking off the edge of the world. The cold hit her immediately, a brutal, teeth-rattling cold that sank through her clothes and into her bones. She'd wrapped the twins as best she could, layering them in every scrap of cloth she had, but she could already feel them squirming against the chill. The sack on her back was heavy. Her legs were weak. Blood still seeped between her thighs, warm and wrong against the frozen air. She took another step, then another. Behind her, the lights of Coldwater Ridge glowed soft and steady, like the town was watching her leave, making sure she didn't turn back. She wouldn't. Not because she was brave, because there was nothing to turn back to. The road north was barely visible under the fresh snow. Mara followed it by instinct, keeping the tree line to her right, her eyes scanning the darkness for the markers Cora had described. 7 miles to the forest road. She tried to calculate how long that would take. An hour in good conditions, maybe. 2 if the snow got worse. She didn't have 2 hours. She had until her body gave out. The twins started to cry. Soft at first, then louder, their voices high and thin in the frozen air. Mara's heart lurched. She stopped, swaying, and fumbled with the sling she'd rigged across her chest. She pressed them close, trying to soothe them with body heat and movement, but they were hungry. She knew that sound. "Not yet," she whispered. "Please. Not yet." But babies didn't negotiate. She stumbled off the road into the cover of the trees and sank down against a trunk. Her hand shook as she loosened her shirt, guiding Elias to her breast. He latched immediately, desperate and greedy, and the pull of it sent a sharp, sweet ache through her chest. Rhea wailed louder. I know, baby. Just wait." She switched them after a few minutes, her body screaming in protest. Everything hurt. Her abdomen felt like it was tearing open. Her head swam with exhaustion and blood loss. But she couldn't stop. Not here. Not this close. When they were both fed, she bundled them again and forced herself to stand. The world tilted. She grabbed the tree, gasping, waiting for the dizziness to pass. When it did, she started walking again. 1 foot, then the other. The snow fell heavier now, thick and silent, erasing her tracks as fast as she made them. That was good. That meant no one could follow. But it also meant she couldn't see where she was going. She counted her steps. 100, 200, lost count. Started again. The forest road appeared like a ghost, a narrow gap between the trees, barely wider than a deer trail. Mara almost missed it. She stopped, staring, trying to remember Cora's directions. 3 miles in. Trapper's shack. 3 miles might as well have been 300, but she walked anyway. The trees closed in around her. The wind died. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch of her boots and the occasional whimper from the twins. Time stopped meaning anything. Minutes, hours. She didn't know. And then she saw it. A shape in the darkness. Low, square, man-made. The shack. Mara stumbled toward it, her vision blurring, her legs buckling. She hit the door with her shoulder, and it swung open, hinges creaking. Inside was dark, cold, but it was shelter. She collapsed just past the threshold, clutching the twins to her chest, and let the darkness take her. When she woke, she wasn't alone. A man stood over her, silhouetted against the pale light of a dying fire. He was tall, lean, his face hidden in shadow. In his hand was a rifle, pointed steady at her chest. "Who the hell are you?" he said. Mara opened her mouth to answer, and the world went black again. Mara woke to the smell of smoke and something cooking. Her body felt like it had been torn apart and stitched back together wrong. Every muscle screamed, her head throbbed. But the twins... She jerked upright, panic flooding her veins. "Easy." The voice was rough, low, male. "They're right here." Her vision cleared slowly. The shack was small, maybe 12 feet square, with walls chinked in moss and mud. A fire crackled in a stone hearth that looked like it had been built and rebuilt a dozen times. And there, in a wooden crate lined with what looked like a deer hide, both twins slept, alive, breathing. Mara's breath came out in a shudder. The man sat across the fire, watching her. He was older than she'd first thought. Maybe 40, maybe 50, hard to tell under the weathered skin and the beard that covered half his face. His eyes were gray, cold as river stones, and they studied her with the detached interest of someone examining a trapped animal. The rifle leaned against the wall behind him, close enough to grab, far enough to make a point. "How long?" Mara's voice came out as a rasp. 2 days. 2 days. She'd lost 2 entire days. Her hand went instinctively to her stomach, feeling the ache there, the deep bruising soreness that told her she'd been bleeding. A lot. "You almost died," the man said flatly. "Still might if you're stupid about it. The babies, they're fed. Goat's milk watered down. Not ideal, but they took it." He stirred whatever was in the pot over the fire. "You want to tell me what you're doing out here, or do I get to guess?" Mara stared at him. He didn't sound friendly. He didn't sound hostile either. Just practical, like she was a problem that needed categorizing before he decided what to do with her. She stopped. What could she say? The truth sounded insane. "I had nowhere else to go." That's not an answer. "It's the only one I've got." He grunted, spooning whatever was in the pot into a wooden bowl, brought it over, set it down in front of her. "Eat. You're no good to those kids dead." It was venison stew, thin and oversalted, but it was hot. Mara's hand shook as she lifted the spoon. The first bite hit her stomach like a stone, but the second went down easier. By the fourth, she was shoveling it in, manners forgotten. The man watched her eat. When she finished, he took the bowl back without a word and refilled it. "What's your name?" she asked. He hesitated, like he was deciding whether names mattered. "Hale. Gideon Hale." "I'm Mara." "I know." That stopped her. "How?" "You talked while you were out." He settled back against the wall. "Said a lot of things. Most of it fever nonsense, but some of it—" He tilted his head. "You got thrown out of Coldwater Ridge." It wasn't a question. Mara's throat tightened. "You know the place?" "Used to." His expression didn't change. "Long time ago." "But then you know what it's like." "I know what men like Driscoll and Howell are like, if that's what you're asking." He picked up a piece of wood, started shaving it with a knife in slow, deliberate strokes. "I also know they don't throw people out in the dead of winter unless they've got a reason, or think they do." "They think I—" She stopped, the words catching in her throat. Saying it out loud made it real, made it shameful, even though she'd done nothing wrong. "Doesn't matter what they think," Gideon said. "Matters what you're going to do now." "I don't know." The honesty came out broken. "I don't have a plan. I just ran. Running's a start. Surviving's harder." He wasn't wrong. Mara looked around the shack. It was sparse. One bedroll, a few traps hanging from nails, a shelf with basic supplies. This wasn't a home. It was a hideout. A place for someone who didn't want to be found. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Gideon didn't look up from his whittling. "Didn't say I was." "You fed my children. You kept me alive. That's help. That's baseline decency. Don't confuse it for charity." He paused. "I don't like waste. You dying here makes a mess. The baby's crying draws animals. Easier to keep you functional." Mara almost laughed. It came out as a choked sound, somewhere between a sob and a cough. "You're a real comfort." "Not trying to be." One of the twins stirred. "Rhea." Mara knew the sound of her. Lighter, more insistent than her brother. She started to stand, but her legs buckled. Gideon moved fast. He caught her before she hit the floor, his grip iron hard. "I said don't be stupid. I need to—" "Sit. Down." He lowered her back onto the bedroll, then crossed to the crate. Picked up Rhea with the awkward care of someone who hadn't held a baby in a very long time. Brought her over. Mara took her daughter, pressing her close, breathing in that milk-sweet smell that was already becoming familiar. Rhea rooted against her, hungry again. Gideon turned his back without being asked. It was a small kindness, but Mara felt it anyway. When both twins were fed and settled again, Gideon spoke without turning around. "You can stay 3 days, maybe 4, if the weather holds. After that, you need to move." "Move where?" "Not my problem." Mara stared at his back.
You really don't care, do you? I care about staying out of other people's trouble. Your trouble. That much is obvious. I didn't ask for this. Nobody ever does. He finally turned, his face unreadable. But you've got it anyway, and those kids don't care about fair. They just need you alive and moving. He was right. Mara hated that he was right. What did you do? She asked. Before this? Before hiding in the woods? Gideon's jaw tightened. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, I enforced laws I didn't write for men I didn't respect. Then I stopped. You were a lawman. Was. The word came out hard. Final. In Coldwater Ridge? Near enough. He picked up his rifle, checked the chamber out of habit. I know how their system works. I know what they do to people who don't fit. And I know that fighting them head-on gets you killed, or worse. Worse? Erased, like you never existed. He met her eyes.
They're good at it, very good. A chill ran through Mara that had nothing to do with the cold. That's what they're doing to me, aren't they? Making me disappear? Already done. You think Caleb's telling people you ran off? That you abandoned him and the kids? Gideon's expression was grim. By now, you're the villain, and he's the victim. Clean story. No loose ends. Except she wasn't gone. She was here, alive. And that changed things. Mara looked down at the twins. Elias had his fist curled against his mouth, sleeping hard. Ria's eyes were half open, unfocused, seeing nothing and everything. I'm not going to run forever, she said quietly. Gideon raised an eyebrow. That's so? I don't know how yet, but I'm not. She lifted her chin. They tried to erase me. I'm going to make damn sure that doesn't stick. For the first time, something that might have been respect flickered across Gideon's face. Big talk from someone who can't walk 10 feet. I'll heal. Maybe. He turned back to the fire. We'll see if you mean it when you can stand on your own. The days blurred together. Mara slept in short, fractured bursts, waking every few hours to feed the twins or change the rags Gideon had grudgingly provided. Her body healed slowly, too slowly. The bleeding stopped, but the weakness lingered. She could stand now without falling, but walking more than a few steps left her shaking. Gideon came and went, checking his trap lines, bringing back rabbits or the occasional grouse. He didn't talk much. When he did, it was practical. How to keep the fire low so smoke wouldn't be visible. How to tell if water was safe to drink. How to move quietly in snow. He wasn't teaching her, he was just talking. Like he'd been alone so long that having another person around loosened something in him, even if he didn't want it to. On the fourth day, Mara asked the question that had been building. Why did you leave? The law, I mean. Gideon was skinning a rabbit, his hands quick and sure. He didn't look up. You don't want that story? I wouldn't ask if I didn't. He was quiet for a long time. Then, there was a man, owned a lot of land south of the ridge, respected, connected. His daughter accused a drifter of assault. Mara went still. The drifter said she was lying, said it was her father, not him. But the father had papers, witnesses, the whole machinery. Gideon's knife moved in steady strokes. I was supposed to bring the drifter in. I did. He hung 3 days later. And the girl? Dead within the year. Fell down the stairs, they said. His voice was flat, empty. Convenient. Mara's stomach turned. You knew. I suspected, but suspicion doesn't mean shit when the records say otherwise, when the witnesses all line up, when the system protects its own. He finally looked at her. I wore the badge for 2 more months. Then I walked into the woods and didn't come back. That was it? You just gave up? I chose sanity over complicity. He set the rabbit aside. Not the same thing. Mara understood, more than she wanted to. They'll do the same to me. Won't they? Make up a story, make it stick. They already have. Then I need proof, something they can't twist. Gideon snorted. Proof? You think proof matters? They write the records. They control the witnesses. You could have a signed confession and it wouldn't mean a damn thing. Then what do I do? Her voice rose, frustration bleeding through. Just hide forever? Let them win? You survive. That's winning. That's not enough. It's all there is. They stared at each other across the fire. Two people who'd been chewed up by the same machine, just in different ways. Finally, Mara spoke. Teach me. Teach you what? How to survive, how to move, how to… She gestured vaguely. How to be invisible when I need to be. Why? Because someday I'm going back. Gideon's expression didn't change. You'll die. Maybe. But I'll die trying. That's better than this. He studied her for a long moment. Then he stood, crossing to a corner of the shack. Came back with a worn leather satchel. Opened it. Inside were papers. Old, yellowed, creased from being folded and unfolded too many times. You know what these are? He asked. Mara shook her head. Records, deeds, certificates, things I took when I left. He spread them out. Every system has cracks. You just have to know where to look. She leaned forward, staring at the documents. They were hard to read, dense legal language, cramped handwriting, but as she studied them, patterns started to emerge. Names that appeared multiple times, dates that didn't line up, signatures that looked too similar. This is fraud, she whispered. That's power. Gideon tapped one of the deeds. This piece of paper says a man named Hoskins owns 600 acres, but if you look here, he pulled out another document. The original survey says it's only 400. Someone changed the records, added land that wasn't theirs. Who? Does it matter? Point is, they did it, and they got away with it because no one checks, no one questions. He looked at her. You want to fight them? You don't do it with a gun. You do it with this. You learn how their system works, and then you use it against them. Mara's heart was pounding. You teach me that? I teach you to read the language. What you do with it is your business. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. She nodded slowly. When do we start? Now, if you're serious. I am. Gideon pulled out another stack of papers. Then stop wasting time and start reading. The lessons were brutal. Not physically, Mara was still too weak for that, but mentally. Gideon didn't coddle. He didn't explain things twice. He'd put a document in front of her, ask her what was wrong with it, and wait. At first she saw nothing, just words and numbers and official-looking seals. But Gideon forced her to slow down, to read every line, to compare documents side by side, to look for inconsistencies. Here, she pointed at a land deed dated 1847. This says the property was transferred in June, but this other one says the owner didn't die until August. Good. What does that tell you? Someone backdated it. Why? Mara thought. To make it look legitimate before a challenge could be filed. Probably, or to cut out heirs or to cover up a dispute. He took the paper back. Point is, it's wrong. And wrong means leverage. She started to see it, the web of it, how every document connected to another, how one lie required 10 more to hold it up, how the whole system was built on a foundation of paper that could burn. Days passed. Mara's strength returned slowly. She could walk the perimeter of the clearing now without collapsing, could carry both twins at once for short distances. Her mind, though, that was getting stronger faster. Gideon showed her how to copy documents in a way that looked authentic, how to spot forged signatures, how to trace ownership through layers of transfers. It was painstaking work, eye-straining and tedious, but Mara attacked it with a focus that surprised even her, because she understood now. This was her weapon, not a knife, not a gun. Information, truth, the one thing they couldn't control if she kept it out of their hands. One night, as the twins slept and the fire burned low, Gideon asked her a question. What are you going to do when you're strong enough to leave? Mara looked up from the document she was studying, a marriage certificate with a suspiciously recent date for a couple listed as having 3 grown children. I don't know yet. You need a plan. Wandering gets you killed. I know. She set the paper down. But I can't go back, not yet. I'm not ready? You'll never be ready. Then I'll get close enough. She met his eyes. I need to be stronger. I need to know more. And I need… She hesitated. I need these kids to survive long enough to see me do it. Gideon was quiet.
Then, there's a settlement, 2 weeks north, smaller than Coldwater Ridge, less organized. They don't ask too many questions. Ooh, you think I should go there? I think you need somewhere you can disappear into. Work, earn, keep your head down while you plan. He poked the fire. And you need someone who knows how to read and write to help you document everything. I can write. Not well enough. Not for this. He pulled out another paper, this one blank. You need to practice every day until your hand doesn't shake, until you can copy a signature so clean even the original writer would believe it. Mara stared at the blank page. You're really going to help me. I'm going to give you tools. What you build with them is your choice. It wasn't sentiment, it wasn't friendship, but it was something. 2 weeks later, Mara could walk 5 miles without stopping. She could write for an hour without her hand cramping. She could recite the key elements of a legal land transfer from memory. And she had a plan. Not a good plan, not a complete one, but a start. She would go north to the settlement Gideon had mentioned. She would find work, something quiet, invisible. She would save every scrap of information she could find about Coldwater Ridge, about the people who ran it, about the system that had destroyed her. And when the time was right, when she was strong enough and smart enough and had enough proof to make them choke on it, she would go back. Not to beg, not to plead, to dismantle them. The morning she left, Gideon walked her to the edge of the clearing. The twins were bundled against her chest, both awake, both staring at the world with those unsettling pale eyes. You've got food for 3 days, Gideon said. Follow the ridgeline north. Don't stop in the open. Don't trust anyone until you've been there a month. I know. And don't come back here. If someone follows you, I won't. Mara shifted the pack on her shoulders. Thank you for everything. Gideon grunted. Don't thank me yet. You might not live long enough for it to matter. Cheerful as ever. Just honest. He paused, then reached into his coat, pulled out a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth, handed it to her. Mara unwrapped it. Inside were more documents, copies of the ones they'd studied, along with a few she hadn't seen before. And a list. Names, dates, connections. That's 5 years of dirt, Gideon said. I never knew what to do with it. Maybe you will. Mara's throat tightened. This is insurance. Maybe. He stepped back. Now go, before I change my mind. She went. The journey north was hard but manageable. Mara moved carefully, rationing her strength, stopping to feed and rest the twins at regular intervals. The weather held, cold but clear. No fresh snow to slow her down. The settlement Gideon had described appeared on the 6th day. It was smaller than Coldwater Ridge, rougher around the edges. The buildings were a mix of log cabins and patched-together shacks. No main street, no obvious center of power. Perfect. Mara walked in just after dawn, when the light was thin and people were too busy starting their day to pay much attention. She found a woman carrying water from a well, older, tired-looking. I'm looking for work, Mara said, and a place to stay. Temporary. The woman looked her over, took in the twins, the worn clothes, the exhaustion written into every line of Mara's face. You running from something? No. Mara met her eyes. Just trying to survive. The woman snorted. Aren't we all? She jerked her head toward a building at the far end of the settlement. Boarding house. Ask for Lena. She might have space. No promises. Thank you. Lena turned out to be a hard-faced woman in her 50s who ran the boarding house with the efficiency of a general. She looked at Mara, looked at the twins, and named a price that was almost reasonable. Can you cook? Lena asked. Yes. Can you clean without complaining? Yes. Can you keep your mouth shut about other people's business? Yes. Lena nodded. Then we'll try a week. You pull your weight, you stay. You don't, you're out. Clear? Clear. The room was barely bigger than Gideon's shack, but it had a real bed and a door that locked. Mara set the twins down carefully, then sat on the edge of the bed and let herself shake for 5 full minutes. She'd made it. Not safe. Not settled. But alive. Hidden. Ready to start building. That night, after the twins were asleep, Mara pulled out the documents Gideon had given her, spread them on the floor, studied them by candlelight until her eyes burned.
Somewhere in this mess of paper and lies was the key to taking down Coldwater Ridge. She just had to find it, and she would, no matter how long it took. 3 years changed everything and nothing. Mara's hands were rougher now, scarred from kitchen work and laundry soap. Her face had lost the softness of her early 20s, replaced by something harder, leaner. She moved differently, too. Quieter, more deliberate, like someone who'd learned that being noticed was dangerous. The twins had grown into small, wiry children who spoke less than other kids their age but watched everything. Elias had his mother's dark eyes and a tendency to disappear into corners with whatever book he could get his hands on. Ria was louder, quicker to anger, quicker to laugh, with a sharp tongue that got her in trouble more often than not. They didn't look like the other children. That hadn't changed. But in this settlement, a place called Ashford that barely showed up on any map, different was common enough that people stopped asking questions after the first few months. Mara worked 6 days a week at the boarding house, cooking and cleaning for travelers and workers passing through. She kept her head down, her voice soft, her past vague. When people asked where she came from, she said south and changed the subject. When they asked about the twins' father, she said dead and let them assume whatever they wanted. Lena had been true to her word. As long as Mara worked hard and stayed out of trouble, she had a room and enough coin to keep the twins fed. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd had in that frozen forest 3 years ago. And in the margins, in the stolen hours before dawn and after the twins slept, Mara studied. The documents Gideon had given her were worn now, edges soft from constant handling. She'd copied them twice over in her own hand, practicing until her forgeries were good enough that even she had trouble telling them apart. She'd added to the collection too. Every traveler who passed through Ashford brought news, gossip, scraps of information about the territory's power structure. She listened. She wrote it down. She built a map in her mind of who owned what, who owed whom, which families had their fingers in which pies. And slowly, painstakingly, the pattern of Coldwater Ridge's corruption became clear. It wasn't just one or two men. It was a network. Driscoll controlled the records. Sheriff Howell controlled enforcement. The preacher, a man named Josiah Carver, controlled the moral authority that made people accept the system without question. And behind all of them, funding and directing, were 3 families who'd built their wealth on stolen land and forged documents going back 2 decades. The Vance family was one of them. Mara had suspected, but seeing it laid out in black and white, tracing Caleb's family connections through deed transfers and witness signatures made something cold and hard settle in her chest. He hadn't just abandoned her. He'd been part of it all along. She was sitting at the small table in her room, candle burning low, when the knock came. Mara's head snapped up. It was past midnight. Nobody knocked this late unless something was wrong. She crossed to the door, pausing. "Who is it?" "It's me." Lena's voice, tight and urgent. "Open up." Mara unlatched the door. Lena pushed inside, breathing hard, her face flushed despite the cold. "There's a man downstairs," Lena said. "Dying. Asked for you specifically." Mara's blood went cold. "What?" "I don't know who he is. He collapsed in the common room an hour ago. Traveler. Came in looking half frozen." Lena grabbed Mara's arm. "Keeps saying your name. Says he has something you need to hear." "That's impossible. Nobody here knows." "Well, somebody does, and if he dies without talking, we'll never know what he wanted." Lena's grip tightened. "You coming or not?" Mara glanced at the twins, both asleep, tangled together under the blanket like puppies. She grabbed her shawl. "Stay with them. Don't let anyone in." "Wasn't planning on it." The common room was empty except for the man sprawled on the floor near the hearth. Someone had dragged him close to the fire, but it didn't seem to be helping. His skin was gray, his breathing shallow and wet-sounding. Mara knelt beside him. He looked to be in his 60s, thin to the point of starvation, with a face that might have been handsome once, but was now just a collection of sharp angles and sunken flesh. His eyes opened, focused on her with effort. "Mara Vance," he rasped. Her stomach dropped. "How do you know that name?" "Gideon. Sent me." Each word seemed to cost him. "Said, if I was ever near Ashford, find you. Tell you." "Tell me what?" The man's hand fumbled inside his coat, pulled out a folded paper, stained and wrinkled.
pressed it into her hand. Records from Coldwater Ridge, births, marriages. They're forging them. Have been for years. Mara's heart hammered. I know, I've been... Not just land deeds. He coughed, a horrible rattling sound. Birth records. They're changing them. Marking certain children, ones they want to, control later, claim later. The room seemed to tilt. What are you talking about? Your twins. His eyes locked on hers. They weren't expelled because of how they looked. They were expelled because someone wanted your husband's land, and the easiest way was to make you disappear, make the children illegitimate. I know that part. You don't. He grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. There's a mark. In the official records. A symbol. Next to certain births. Means the child is flagged for future manipulation. Your twins were marked before they were even born. Mara's mouth went dry. That's not possible. How could they know? They didn't. They mark anyone who might complicate inheritance, anyone born to families with valuable property. Then they wait. If the child becomes a problem, he coughed again, blood speckling his lips, they erase them, legally, on paper, like they never existed. The implications crashed over Mara like a wave. If what he was saying was true, then her exile wasn't random. It wasn't even about adultery. It was premeditated, planned. They'd been waiting for an excuse to remove her, and when the twins were born looking different, they'd taken it. Where did you get this? She unfolded the paper. It was a page from a birth ledger, the entries cramped and official looking. And there, next to 3 names, was a small mark. A circle with a line through it, simple, easy to miss. I was a clerk. In the land office, 20 years. The man's breathing was getting worse. I copied what I could when I figured out what they were doing. Been running ever since. Why? Why run? Why not expose them? Because I'm a coward. He smiled, bitter and broken. And because they would have killed me. Still will, if they find me. But Gideon said, you were different. Said you might actually do something with it. I will. Mara's voice was hard. I swear I will. Good. His eyes started to close. One more thing. The midwife, Finch, she knows. She's marked children herself, under orders. If you can get her to talk, she won't. She was there. She watched them throw me out and said nothing. People change when they're scared enough or guilty enough. His hand fell away from her wrist. Find her. Make her tell the truth. Wait, what's your name? Doesn't matter. His breathing rattled one more time, then stopped. Mara sat there, holding a dead man's hand, staring at a piece of paper that changed everything. She buried him the next morning in the small plot behind the settlement. No marker, no ceremony, just a hole in the frozen ground and a stranger's body wrapped in canvas. Lena stood beside her, watching. You going to tell me what that was about? No? Figured. Lena sighed. You need anything? Time. And someone to watch the twins for a few hours. Where are you going? To think. She walked into the woods, following a trail she'd worn over 3 years of early morning escapes when the boarding house felt too small and her rage too big. The forest was quiet, the snow undisturbed except for animal tracks. Mara found her spot, a fallen log near a frozen creek, and sat down. The paper from the dying clerk was in her pocket. She pulled it out, studied it again in the daylight. 3 names marked with that symbol. One was a girl who'd died at age 7 in a house fire. One was a boy who'd been sent to an asylum at 14 for fits. And the third was a man who'd signed over his entire property to the Driscoll family at age 21 and then vanished. All flagged from birth. All removed when convenient. The system wasn't just corrupt. It was surgical. And if the clerk was right, Elias and Rhea were marked too. Which meant even if she did nothing, even if she hid forever, eventually someone would come for them. To control them. To use them. To erase them. She couldn't let that happen. But going back to Coldwater Ridge, walking into the belly of the machine that had tried to destroy her, that was suicide. Especially alone. Especially with 2 children who'd be recognized the moment anyone saw them. Unless
An idea began to form. Dangerous, complicated, probably stupid, but possible. She needed help, real help. Someone who understood the law, who could navigate official channels, who had authority that Coldwater Ridge couldn't just dismiss. She needed Gideon. 2 weeks later, Mara stood outside the shack in the forest clearing where this had all started. It looked exactly the same, smoke rising from the chimney, traps hanging from the eaves, the door closed but not locked. She knocked. Silence. Then footsteps. The door opened. Gideon stood there, older and grayer than she remembered, but his eyes were the same, sharp, assessing. Mara. No surprise in his voice, like he'd been expecting her. I need your help. Figured you might, eventually. He stepped aside. Come in. The shack was unchanged too. Same sparse furniture, same smell of wood smoke and gun oil, but there was something new, paper spread across the table, covered in notes and diagrams. Gideon saw her looking. I've been busy. Doing what? Same thing you have, I'd guess. Building a case. He gestured at the table. Took me a while to get moving, but that clerk, Thomas Wade, his name was, he sent me copies of what he gave you before he ran. Got me thinking. He's dead. I know. Heard 2 days ago. Gideon's expression darkened. They found him. Or he just gave out. Either way, he's gone. Mara set her pack down. The twins were with Lena, safe for now. This conversation needed to happen without them. He told me about the marks, the flagged births. I've been tracking them, going back 25 years. Gideon tapped the papers. 63 children marked, 41 of them dead, disappeared, or dispossessed by age 30. You seeing the pattern? They're culling anyone who might challenge the established families. Worse, they're farming them, waiting to see which ones accumulate property or influence, then removing them and taking what they built. He sat down heavily. It's efficient. I'll give them that. Mara's hands clenched. We have to stop them. We can't. What? Not directly. Not with violence. Gideon met her eyes. I've been thinking about this for 3 years. Every scenario ends the same way. We go in loud, we get killed. We go in quiet, we disappear. The system protects itself. Then what do? We use the system. We make it eat itself. He pulled out another document, this one official looking with a territorial seal. I still have contacts, people who owe me favors. I can get your twins recognized as legitimate. Get them territorial documentation that supersedes local records. Mara's breath caught. How? There's a circuit judge, comes through twice a year. He's not part of their network. If we can present evidence of fraud, real documented evidence, he has the authority to investigate, to audit the records, to nullify forged documents. They'll fight it. Of course they will. But if we're smart, if we build the case right, they won't be able to stop it without exposing themselves. Gideon leaned forward. The key is the midwife, Finch. She's the weak link. She's marked children. She's witnessed the births. She's signed documents. If we can flip her, she won't talk. She's too deep in it. Everyone talks when the alternative is worse. Gideon's smile was thin and cold. And I know things about Cora Finch that would make her very motivated to cooperate. Mara studied him. You've really thought this through. I've had time and motivation, he paused. That clerk, Wade, he didn't just send me documents. He sent me a letter. Said you were the only person he'd met in 20 years who had the spine to fight back. Said I should help you, because if anyone could break Coldwater Ridge, it was you. He barely knew me. He knew enough. Gideon stood. So, you want to do this? Really do it? Because once we start, there's no backing out. They'll come for you, for your kids, for everyone who helps you. Mara thought of the twins, of the marks next to their names in a ledger somewhere, of the future being written for them by men they'd never met. I want to do it. Then we need a plan, a real one. Gideon started gathering papers. First, we document everything we have, every deed, every transfer, every suspicious death or disappearance. We build a timeline that shows the pattern. I've already started that. Good. Second, we identify witnesses, people who've been hurt by the system, people who'll talk if we can protect them. How do we protect them? We don't. We just make them more afraid of staying silent than speaking up. He pulled out a map, spread it on the table. Third, we get your twins out of the territory, somewhere safe, somewhere they can't be used as leverage. Mara's chest tightened. I'm not sending them away. You might not have a choice. I'll have a choice. I've spent 3 years keeping them alive. I'm not handing them off to strangers now. Gideon looked like he wanted to argue, but he nodded instead. Your call, but it makes things harder. Everything's already hard. They worked through the night. Gideon had more documents than Mara had expected. 20 years of collected evidence, patterns of fraud and manipulation that went beyond even what Wade had revealed. Together, they started building something that looked less like conspiracy theory and more like prosecutable crime. By dawn, they had the skeleton of a case. We're missing one thing, Gideon said, rubbing his eyes. Proof that the current records are forged. We have old documents, suspicious patterns, witness testimony. But if Driscoll's ledgers look clean, a judge might dismiss it as ancient history. So we need to see the current ledgers, which are locked in the land office, under guard. In the middle of Coldwater Ridge, Mara smiled grimly. Then I guess we're going to Coldwater Ridge. That's insane. You have a better idea? He didn't. 2 months later, everything was ready. Gideon had reached out to his contacts, quietly spreading word that a case was being built. The circuit judge, a man named Bartholomew Cross, had agreed to review the evidence when he came through in the spring. That gave them 4 months to finish gathering proof. Mara had trained, not just physically, though Gideon had worked her hard, teaching her to move silently, to handle a knife, to defend herself if it came to that, but mentally too. He'd drilled her on legal terminology, on how to present evidence, on how to stay calm under hostile questioning. The twins had been harder. Elias understood, in his quiet way, that something big was happening. He asked questions Mara couldn't answer, then retreated into himself when she told him to trust her. Rhea was more defiant, demanding to know why they had to practice staying silent, why they had to memorize cover stories, why everything was secret. Because we're going to war, Mara finally told her. And in war, you survive by being smarter than your enemy. Who's the enemy? Rhea asked. People who tried to erase us. Mara knelt down, looking her daughter in the eyes. And we're going to make sure they never forget we existed. Rhea smiled. She had her mother's anger. Good. The plan was simple on paper. Gideon would enter Coldwater Ridge first, using his old credentials to request access to records under the guise of settling a boundary dispute. While he kept Driscoll and the clerk busy, Mara would slip into the land office through a back window and photograph the current ledgers using a camera Gideon had acquired from a traveling journalist. It was risky. If she was caught, there would be no explanation good enough, no mercy. But it was the only way. They left Ashford on a cold morning in late February. The twins stayed behind with Lena, who'd been told only that Mara was handling business and would be back in a week. Lena hadn't believed it, but she'd agreed to watch them anyway. You get yourself killed, Lena had said. I'm raising those kids to hate you for being stupid. Fair enough. The journey to Coldwater Ridge took 4 days. Mara had forgotten how the landscape changed as you got closer. The trees thinning out, the settlements getting more organized, the roads more maintained, civilization creeping back in. She hated it. On the evening of the 4th day, they stopped on a ridge overlooking the town. Mara stood there, staring down at the place that had destroyed her, and felt nothing but cold purpose. You ready? Gideon asked. No. She turned to him. But let's do it anyway. They went in at dawn. Gideon walked into the land office at 10 minutes past 8, dressed in clothes Mara had never seen him wear. A dark suit that had seen better days but still carried the weight of authority. A hat pulled low enough to shadow his face. He moved differently, too, straighter, harder, like he'd put on more than just clothes. He'd put on the man he used to be. Mara watched from across the street, tucked into the narrow gap between the general store and a saddle shop. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The camera hung heavy in the bag at her side, wrapped in cloth to keep it from making noise. She'd been in Coldwater Ridge for less than an hour and already felt like the walls were closing in. Every face that passed looked familiar, even though she recognized none of them. Every glance felt like accusation. She forced herself to breathe, to wait. Inside the land office, Gideon approached the counter where a young clerk sat hunched over a ledger. The kid couldn't have been more than 20, with ink-stained fingers and the nervous energy of someone who knew he was at the bottom of a very tall ladder. "I need to see the boundary records for the eastern parcels," Gideon said, his voice flat and official. "Dispute over a creek line. Been going on for 6 months." The clerk looked up, squinting. "You with the territorial office?" Gideon pulled out a document, one he'd forged himself 3 weeks ago, aged with coffee and wrinkled to look well-traveled. "That answer your question?" The kid glanced at it, didn't look close enough. "I'll need to get Mr. Driscoll. He handles—" "I don't need Driscoll. I need the records." Gideon's tone sharpened. "Unless you're telling me you don't know where they're kept?" "No, sir. I know where they are." "It's just protocol. Protocol is wasting territorial time on a boundary dispute that should have been settled months ago." Gideon leaned against the counter. "Get me the eastern parcel ledgers. All of them. I'll be in the back room reviewing them." The clerk hesitated, caught between following orders and challenging someone who sounded like he had more authority than a 20-year-old filing clerk could handle. He made the wrong choice. "Yes, sir. I'll bring them to you." Gideon nodded and walked toward the back room like he owned the place. The clerk scurried to the locked cabinet where the ledgers were kept. Outside, Mara counted to 60, then moved. The land office had a rear entrance, a door that led to a storage area where old records and surveying equipment were kept. Mara had studied the building's layout from Gideon's memory, sketching it out until she could walk through it blind. The door was locked, but the lock was old. Mara pulled a thin piece of metal from her pocket, a tool Gideon had made from a broken fork, and worked it into the mechanism. Her hands shook. She forced them steady. The lock clicked. She slipped inside, easing the door closed behind her. The storage room was dark and smelled of mold and old paper. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with boxes and rolled maps. A single window let in weak morning light. Mara moved toward the interior door that connected to the main office, pressed her ear against it, heard the clerk's footsteps, the rustle of paper, Gideon's voice asking questions that required long, detailed answers. "Good. Keep him busy." She turned to the shelves and started searching. The current ledgers wouldn't be back here. Those would be in Driscoll's office or the locked cabinet up front. But land offices kept copies, backups, draft versions that hadn't been filed yet, and those were often less carefully guarded. Mara's fingers moved across the boxes, reading labels. Deeds 1851 to 1855. Survey reports. Water rights. Nothing current. She kept searching, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cold. Then she found it. A box labeled Current Transfers, Pending Review. She pulled it down carefully, set it on the floor. Inside were loose papers, some with fresh ink, some marked with notes in Driscoll's cramped handwriting, and beneath them a smaller ledger, unmarked. Mara opened it. Birth records. Current year and previous 5 years. Names, dates, witnesses. And next to certain entries, that same small mark. Circle with a line through it. Her breath caught. She pulled out the camera, set up the small stand Gideon had rigged for her. The camera was unwieldy, the kind journalists used with a flash powder that would give her away the second she used it. But she didn't need flash in here. The window gave just enough light if she angled the pages right. She started photographing. 1 page. 2. 3. Her hands moved mechanically, focusing the lens, clicking the shutter, advancing the film. Every sound felt deafening. In the main office, Gideon's voice rose slightly. "This survey doesn't match the deed, you see that? Right here. The creek line is off by 30 yards. I'll have to ask Mr. Driscoll, then ask him. I'll wait." Footsteps, the clerk leaving. Mara worked faster. She was on the 8th page when she heard the front door open. Heavy boots. A voice she recognized even though she hadn't heard it in 3 years. Samuel Driscoll. "What's this about a boundary dispute?" His voice was sharp, suspicious. "Eastern parcels," Gideon said calmly. "The Hoskins claim versus the territorial survey. I've been trying to sort it for months." "I wasn't notified of any territorial investigation." "You are now." There was a pause. Mara could almost see Driscoll's mind working.
trying to decide if this was legitimate or if something was wrong.
Let me see your credentials. Mara's heart stopped. The forged document would hold up to a glance, but if Driscoll looked closely, if he sent a wire to verify. Of course. Gideon's voice remained steady. She heard papers shuffling, silence. Then Driscoll's voice, colder now. This seal looks off. It's 3 months old. They updated the design in January. That's so? Driscoll wasn't buying it. And you came all the way out here for a creek boundary? I go where I'm sent. Right. Driscoll's tone turned flat. Howell, get in here. Mara's stomach dropped. She shoved the camera back in the bag, closed the ledger, put everything back exactly as she'd found it. Her hands fumbled. A paper slipped, fluttered to the floor. She grabbed it, stuffed it in the box, didn't have time to check if it was in the right order. Heavy footsteps in the main office now. Sheriff Howell's voice, gravelly and dangerous. Problem? This man says he's territorial, but something's not right. Driscoll's voice was moving, coming closer to the back. Check the storage room. Mara's mind raced. The back door was 20 feet away. If she ran now, they'd hear her. If she stayed, they'd find her. She looked at the window, too small to climb through, no other exit. She was trapped. The door handle started to turn. A crash from the front office, glass shattering. Gideon's voice, loud and angry. Watch where you're putting those ledgers. The door handle stopped. Howell's footsteps retreated. What the hell? Mara didn't wait. She moved to the back door, eased it open, slipped through, closed it silently behind her, and ran. She didn't stop running until she was 3 blocks away, lungs burning, bags slapping against her side. She ducked into an alley, pressed her back against the wall, and tried not to throw up. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the bag. But she'd done it. She had the photographs. Now she just had to hope Gideon could get out. Gideon sat in the back room of the land office, surrounded by ledgers he didn't care about, while Driscoll and Howell questioned him. The broken glass had bought him time. He'd knocked over an inkwell accidentally, making a mess that needed cleaning, but they weren't letting him leave. I'm going to send a wire, Driscoll said. Verify your credentials with the territorial office. Go ahead. Gideon kept his voice bored. I'll be here when you get confirmation. You better be. Driscoll left. Howell stayed, leaning against the wall, hand resting on his pistol. His eyes never left Gideon. I know you, Howell said after a long silence. Gideon didn't react. Don't think so. Yeah, I do. You used to work south of here, enforcement, long time ago. A lot of people worked enforcement. Not a lot quit the way you did. Howell's eyes narrowed. Just walked off. Middle of an investigation. Never came back. People change careers. Some people do, others just run. Howell pushed off the wall, came closer. What are you really doing here, Hale? So he remembered the name. That was bad. Gideon met his eyes. My job? Bullshit. Howell's hand moved to his pistol grip. You're working with someone. Who? The territorial governor's office. Like my papers say. Your papers are fake. Prove it. They stared at each other. Gideon kept his breathing even, his posture relaxed. He'd been in worse situations, survived worse threats. But he was older now, slower, and Howell had the advantage of position. If this went bad, Gideon wasn't walking out. The front door opened, footsteps. Then a woman's voice, clear and commanding. Mr. Driscoll, I need to speak with you immediately. Howell's attention shifted for just a second. Gideon moved. He didn't go for Howell's gun. That was suicide. He went for the door, slamming it open and bolting into the main office before Howell could react. The woman who'd called for Driscoll was standing at the counter, middle-aged, well-dressed, holding a stack of papers. She looked startled as Gideon rushed past her. Stop him, Howell shouted. But Gideon was already out the front door, moving fast despite his age. Behind him, he heard Howell cursing, the woman asking what was happening, chaos spreading. He didn't look back. He ran 3 blocks, ducked into a stable, climbed into the loft, and waited. His heart pounded. His leg throbbed. Old injury from his lawman days, never healed right. But he was out. He waited an hour, then another. Finally, when the sun was high and the sounds of pursuit had faded, he climbed down and slipped out of town the long way, avoiding the main roads. Mara was waiting at the rendezvous point, an abandoned homestead 5 miles north. She stood when she saw him, relief flooding her face. "You made it." "Barely." Gideon collapsed against a fence post. "They made me." Howell recognized me. "Did you get anything?" "No." "But you did, right?" Mara pulled out the camera. 8 pages, birth records, with the marks. Gideon's exhale was long and shaky. Then it was worth it. They developed the photographs that night in a dark room Gideon had set up in an abandoned line shack. The process was painstaking, chemicals and timing and prayer that the images would come out clear enough to read. When the first photograph emerged from the developing bath, Mara's hands trembled. The page was readable. Every entry, every name, every mark. She counted them. 12 children flagged in the last 5 years alone. 4 were already dead. 3 had been removed from their families under various legal pretenses. The rest were still young, still vulnerable, still targets. "This is it," she whispered. "This is proof." "It's a start." Gideon hung the photograph to dry. "But we need more. We need witnesses. We need Finch." Cora Finch lived on the edge of Coldwater Ridge in a small house that had seen better decades. She lived alone now, her husband dead 10 years, her children grown and scattered. She still worked as a midwife, still attended births, still signed certificates, still marked children. Mara knocked on her door 3 days later, alone. Gideon had wanted to come, but Mara knew this conversation needed to be woman to woman. Cora opened the door, looked at Mara, and went pale. "No." She tried to close the door. Mara jammed her foot in. "We need to talk." "I have nothing to say to you." "Then listen." Mara pushed inside, forcing Cora back. The house was tidy, impersonal, the kind of place where someone lived but didn't build a life. "I know what you've been doing. I have proof. Photographs of the ledgers. Birth records with your signature next to flagged children." Cora's face went from pale to gray. "You can't. That's not. I can. I did. And I'm going to a judge with it." Mara stepped closer. "But I'm giving you one chance. Tell the truth. Testify. Tell them how the system works, who gives the orders, which children you were told to mark." "They'll kill me." "They'll kill you anyway, eventually, when you're not useful anymore." Mara's voice was hard. "You know that. You've seen it happen." Cora sank into a chair, her hands shaking. "You don't understand. I didn't have a choice. They said if I didn't cooperate, they'd take my license. I'd lose everything. So you marked children instead, sent them to their deaths. I didn't know. Not at first. I thought it was just record-keeping, administrative." Cora's voice broke. "By the time I figured it out, I was too deep in, too complicit." "Then make it right." "How? How does telling the truth fix what I've done?" "It doesn't." Mara knelt down, looked Cora in the eyes. "But it stops it from happening to more children. It breaks the system. And maybe you get to die knowing you did something decent at the end." Cora stared at her. Tears ran down her weathered face. "You hate me." "Yes." "You should." "I know." Cora wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "What do you need me to say?" They spent 3 hours going through everything. Every birth Cora had attended where she'd been told to mark the record. Every conversation with Driscoll or the preacher or any of the men who ran Coldwater Ridge. Every child she knew had been flagged and later removed. Mara wrote it all down in careful, precise handwriting. When they were done, she had 6 pages of testimony that would destroy reputations and end careers. "Will you sign this?" Mara asked. Cora stared at the pages. Her hand hovered over the pen. Then she picked it up and signed her name at the bottom. "What happens now?" Cora asked. "Now we wait for the judge. And if he doesn't believe us, then we try something else." Mara folded the testimony carefully. "But we don't stop." Judge Bartholomew Cross arrived in Coldwater Ridge on a wet morning in April. He was a small man with sharp eyes and a reputation for being incorruptible, which in the territory meant he'd probably just never been offered enough to compromise. Gideon met him at the boarding house where he was staying before anyone else could get to him. "I have evidence of systematic fraud," Gideon said, setting a folder on the table between them. "Land records, birth certificates, witness testimony, all pointing to a conspiracy involving the land office, the sheriff, and several prominent families. Cross opened the folder, read in silence for 10 minutes, then looked up. This is serious. I know. If even half of this is true, it means the entire administrative structure of this town is corrupt. It's all true. I have photographs, signed testimony from a midwife who participated under duress, and records going back 20 years showing a pattern. Cross leaned back. Who else knows about this? Just me and the person who gathered the evidence. Where are they? Safe. For now. Cross studied Gideon. You used to be a lawman. A long time ago. Why bring this to me? Why not handle it yourself? Because I don't trust myself to do it clean. Gideon's voice was flat. And because this needs to be legal, official, by the book. Otherwise, they'll just rebuild somewhere else. Cross nodded slowly. I'll need to interview witnesses, review the physical records myself, and I'll need protection while I do it. If what you're saying is true, these people won't let me investigate without a fight. I can arrange that. Can you? Cross's eyes were sharp. Because I'm not interested in starting a war I can't finish. It's already started. I'm just giving you the chance to end it the right way. The investigation took 2 weeks. Cross brought in a territorial marshal and 3 deputies from outside the region, men who had no connections to Coldwater Ridge. They audited the land office records, comparing them to the photographs Mara had taken. They interviewed Cora Finch, who testified for 6 hours straight, naming names and describing the system in excruciating detail. They exhumed property deeds and cross-referenced them with survey reports, finding discrepancies in nearly 40% of the transfers over the last decade. Driscoll tried to run. He made it 10 miles before the deputies caught him. Howell barricaded himself in the sheriff's office and had to be talked down after a tense standoff. The preacher, Josiah Carver, claimed ignorance and cooperated immediately, throwing everyone else under the wheels to save himself. The 3 families who'd funded it all, including the Vances, tried to lawyer their way out. But Cross was meticulous. Every claim they made, he had a document that contradicted it. Every witness they called, he had evidence that impeached them. The case was airtight. On a cold morning in May, Cross delivered his findings in the town hall. The room was packed. Every seat filled, people standing against the walls, tension thick enough to cut. Cross didn't waste words. The records of Coldwater Ridge have been systematically falsified for no less than 18 years. Property has been stolen through fraudulent transfers. Children have been marked for removal based on inheritance concerns. And officials at every level have participated in or enabled this conspiracy. He listed the names, the charges, the evidence. When he got to Caleb Vance, Mara was standing in the back of the room. She watched as her former husband's face went from red to white, watched as the people around him shifted away, creating distance. Cross continued. I am hereby nullifying 47 property transfers, reinstating 12 wrongfully dispossessed families, and issuing warrants for the arrest of Samuel Driscoll, Thomas Howell, and 6 others on charges of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. The room erupted, shouting, accusations. Someone threw a chair. The deputies moved in, restoring order with hard looks and the threat of force. When the chaos settled, Cross spoke again. This territory was built on the promise of law, of fairness, of a chance for anyone willing to work hard and play straight. What happened here was a betrayal of that promise. It ends now. He closed his folder. Court is adjourned. Mara slipped out before anyone could see her, before Caleb could turn and meet her eyes. She didn't need him to see her. She just needed him to know that the world he'd built on lies had collapsed, and she was the one who'd brought it down. The letter came on a Tuesday morning when the sun was just starting to burn off the fog that clung to Ashford's narrow streets. Mara was elbow-deep in dishwater, scrubbing pots from the breakfast service, when Lena walked into the kitchen and set the envelope on the counter beside her. The envelope was thick cream-colored paper, sealed with dark red wax that bore the territorial court's official stamp. Water dripped from Mara's hands onto the counter, darkening the paper's edge. You going to open it or just stare at it? Lena asked. Mara dried her hands on her apron, slow and deliberate, buying time. She'd been expecting this. Some kind of official notification about the trial's outcome, about what happened next. But now that it was here, she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Her hands were steadier than she expected when she broke the seal. The letter inside was written in formal legal language that took her a moment to parse. Then she got to the relevant section and had to read it 3 times to make sure she understood. What does it say? Lena was watching her face. They're giving me back the land, the cabin. 40 acres. Mara's voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. And dissolving the marriage on grounds of fraud and abandonment. That's good, isn't it? I don't know what it is. Mara set the letter down. Her hands had started shaking now, delayed reaction. 3 years ago, I would have killed for this. Would have done anything to get that land back, to make them admit they were wrong. And now? Now I don't know if I want it. She looked at Lena. That cabin has nothing but bad memories. That land cost me everything. Why would I want to go back? Maybe you don't. Maybe you sell it and use the money for something else. Lena picked up the letter, scanned it. Says here you're also entitled to compensation from the seized assets. That could be substantial. Mara hadn't gotten that far. She took the letter back, found the section Lena meant. The amount would be determined by the liquidation of properties and accounts belonging to the convicted parties, distributed among those who'd been wronged. It could take months to calculate, but preliminary estimates suggested significant sums. Blood money. Payment for years stolen, for trauma inflicted, for a life interrupted. I need to think, Mara said. Think fast. Letter says you've got 30 days to respond about the property. 30 days to decide if she wanted to reclaim the place that had nearly killed her or let it go forever. Mara went to find the twins. They were in the small courtyard behind the boarding house, where Lena let them play when the weather was decent. Elias had a book open. He'd taught himself to read over the past year, devouring every scrap of printed material he could find. Rhea was practicing with a wooden sword Gideon had carved for her, striking at an imaginary opponent with fierce concentration. Both of them looked up when Mara approached. They'd learned to read her moods, to sense when something important was happening. It was a survival skill, one Mara wished they didn't need. We need to talk, she said. They followed her inside without question, settling at the small table in their room. Mara sat across from them, the letter between her hands. I got word from the territorial court, she began, about the trial, about what happens next. Elias's eyes went to the letter. What did they say? They're giving us back the cabin, the land where you were born, and they're paying us compensation for what was done. Rhea's face lit up. We're getting our home back? It was never really our home, sweetheart. We lived there for one night. One very bad night. But it's ours, right? They can't take it away again? No. It's legally ours now, registered in my name. But, Mara paused, choosing her words carefully. I'm not sure I want it. The twins exchanged glances. Some silent communication passed between them, the kind only siblings shared. Can we see it? Elias asked quietly. Before you decide? Why? Because it's part of our story, the place where everything started. He looked down at his hands. I want to know what it looks like. I want to see it with my own eyes, not just imagine it from your descriptions. Rhea nodded agreement. We should see it, all of us. Then we can decide together. Mara studied her children. 6 years old and already carrying weight that would break most adults. Already thinking in terms of we and together, because they'd learned early that family was the only thing they could count on. All right, she said, we'll go see it, but I'm not making any promises about keeping it. That's fair, Elias said, with the gravity of someone 3 times his age. The journey to Coldwater Ridge took a week to arrange. Mara needed to get time off from Lena, which meant working double shifts for 3 days straight to make up for her absence. She needed to borrow a wagon and horse, buy supplies for the trip, and most importantly, steel herself for returning to the place that had destroyed her. Gideon offered to come. You shouldn't go alone, he said when she told him her plans. I won't be alone. The twins are coming. I meant you shouldn't go without backup. That town tried to kill you once. Who's to say they won't try again? The entire corrupt administration is in jail or fled. Judge Cross cleaned house. Corruption has a way of growing back, like weeds. Gideon was sharpening a knife as he spoke, the blade catching the light with each stroke. Let me come. I'll keep my distance if you need space, but I'll be there if things go sideways. Mara wanted to argue, wanted to prove she could do this alone, that she didn't need protection or support. But she'd learned over the past 3 years that pride was expensive and asking for help wasn't weakness. All right, she said. Thank you. They left on a cool morning in late spring. The twins sat in the back of the wagon, watching the landscape change as they traveled. Mara drove, with Gideon riding alongside on his own horse. They didn't talk much. There wasn't much to say. As they got closer to Coldwater Ridge, Mara's chest got tighter. Every landmark felt like a memory trying to surface. The ridge where she'd looked back at the town lights, bleeding and broken. The forest road where she'd stumbled through snow. The clearing where Gideon's shack had saved her life. She didn't point these places out to the twins. Some stories didn't need telling. They reached Coldwater Ridge in the late afternoon of the second day. The town looked different in daylight, without the distortion of fear and pain. Smaller, less imposing. Just a collection of buildings at the edge of civilization, like 100 other frontier settlements. People stared as they rode down the main street. Mara kept her eyes forward, her face neutral. Let them stare. She had nothing to hide anymore. The cabin was on the eastern edge of town, set back from the road. Mara stopped the wagon 50 yards away, suddenly unable to go further.
That's it? Rhea asked, standing up in the wagon bed to see better. That's it. It looked abandoned. The windows were dark, the door closed. Snow from the previous winter still clung to the shaded side of the roof. No smoke from the chimney, no signs of life. Can we go inside? Elias asked. Mara's hands were locked on the reins. She forced herself to loosen her grip. Yes, give me a minute. Gideon had dismounted and was studying the cabin with the careful attention of someone assessing a potential threat. Doesn't look like anyone's been here in a while. Door's still got a lock on it. Caleb probably left when the trial started, didn't want to face the scrutiny. Coward. Gideon said it matter-of-factly, without particular heat. Mara climbed down from the wagon. Her legs felt unsteady. The twins jumped down after her, waiting for her lead. Stay close, she said. Then she walked toward the cabin. The door was locked, as Gideon had noted. Mara pulled the key from her pocket. It had been included in the official paperwork, along with the deed. Her hand shook as she fitted it into the lock. The door swung open with a creak. Inside, everything was exactly as she remembered. The narrow bed where she'd given birth. The table where she and Caleb had eaten silent meals. The shelf with a few remaining dishes. The floor where she'd bled. The air was stale and cold. Dust covered every surface. It smelled like abandonment, like a place where life had stopped. The twins stepped inside cautiously, looking around with wide eyes. This is where we were born? Rhea's voice was small. Right there. Mara pointed to the bed. Both of you, in the middle of a snowstorm. You came early. I wasn't ready. Were you scared? Elias asked. Terrified. Mara ran her hand along the edge of the table. But also hopeful. I thought once you were born, once Caleb saw you, everything would be all right. But it wasn't. No, it wasn't. She turned to face them. They took one look at you and decided you were wrong. Not because you were sick or weak, just because you looked different. Rhea's jaw set in that stubborn way she had. Then they were stupid. They were scared and stupid. Both things can be true. Elias was walking slowly around the room, taking in details. He stopped at the window, looking out toward the town. Did you know that they were going to send you away? Not until it happened. It was very fast. The midwife called the sheriff called Caleb, and within hours I was being put out in the snow. Mara's voice was steady, but the memories were sharp. I had 2 hours to pack, to figure out how to survive with 2 newborns in the dead of winter. How did you do it? I got lucky. The midwife, Cora Finch. She gave me supplies, told me about a shack in the forest where I might find shelter. If she hadn't done that, we probably wouldn't have made it. Is she still here? Rhea asked. In the town? I don't know. Probably. Mara hadn't thought about Cora in months, had been trying not to think about her. The woman had helped, yes, but she'd also participated in the system that marked children for removal. Her guilt was complicated. Can we see her? I want to know what she looks like. Maybe later. Right now I just want to get through this. They spent another 20 minutes in the cabin.
Mara showed them the root cellar, the small loft where supplies were stored, the hearth where she'd cooked meals. The twins asked questions. What did she eat? Where did she sleep? What was Caleb like before everything went wrong? Mara answered as honestly as she could, painting a picture of a life that had been ordinary until the moment it shattered. When they finally stepped back outside, Mara felt lighter, like confronting the place had robbed it of some of its power over her. Gideon was leaning against the wagon, whittling a piece of wood. He looked up when they emerged. How was it? Smaller than my nightmares, Mara said. They usually are. A voice called from across the yard. Mara? Mara Vance? Mara turned. A woman was approaching, middle-aged and weathered, with gray hair and lines of hard living etched into her face. Cora Finch. Mara's first instinct was to get the twins back in the wagon and leave. But Rhea had already asked about the midwife, and running felt too much like weakness. Cora, Mara said neutrally, I heard you were back. I wasn't sure if it was true. Cora stopped a few feet away, wringing her hands. I'm glad you came. I've wanted to talk to you for so long. We don't have anything to talk about. Please, just 5 minutes. I owe you an explanation. You owe me a lot more than that. Cora flinched but didn't retreat. I know. I know what I did was wrong, what I participated in. I've had 3 years to think about it, to regret it. Regret doesn't change anything. I know that too. Cora's eyes moved to the twins, who were watching her with identical expressions of suspicion. Are these my children? Elias and Rhea. They're beautiful. Rhea made a disgusted sound. Elias just stared. Cora looked back at Mara. I testified against them. Driscoll, Howell, all of them. I told Judge Cross everything, every child I was ordered to mark, every record I was told to falsify. It's not enough, I know, but I wanted you to know that I tried to make it right. You testified to save yourself, Mara said. Let's not pretend it was noble. You're right. It wasn't noble. It was self-preservation. But the result was the same. They're in jail, the system is broken, and children aren't being marked anymore. Mara studied the woman who'd brought her twins into the world and then watched silently as she was exiled. Part of her wanted to scream, to rage, to make Cora feel even a fraction of what she'd felt. But what would that accomplish? I'm not going to forgive you, Mara said finally. Not today, maybe not ever. But I appreciate that you told the truth when it mattered. Cora nodded, tears streaming down her weathered face. That's more than I deserve. Thank you. She turned to leave, then paused. The cabin. Are you keeping it? I don't know yet. If you decide to sell, there are families who'd pay fair price. Good families. It's prime land. I'll keep that in mind. Cora walked away, her shoulders hunched against some invisible weight. Mara watched her go and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no anger, just a hollow recognition that some debts could never be repaid. Are we leaving? Elias asked. Soon. There's one more thing I need to do. She needed to see Caleb. She hadn't planned on it, had actively avoided thinking about it, but now that she was here, in Coldwater Ridge, the confrontation felt inevitable. She needed to look him in the eye, needed to hear whatever excuse he'd manufactured, needed to close that door completely. Gideon agreed to watch the twins while she went. You sure you want to do this alone? He asked. No, but I'm doing it anyway. Holler if you need backup. I will. Finding Caleb wasn't hard. Coldwater Ridge wasn't big enough for people to truly hide. Mara asked at the general store, and the clerk, a different person than she remembered, someone young enough to have no memory of her, said Caleb had taken a room above the saddle shop after vacating the cabin. Mara climbed the narrow stairs, her heart pounding harder with each step. She knocked on the door at the top. Footsteps inside. Then the door opened. Caleb looked like he'd aged 10 years and 3. His hair had gone significantly gray, his face more lined, his eyes hollowed out. He stared at her like she was a ghost, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Mara. Her name came out as a rasp. Can I come in? He stepped back wordlessly. The room was small and sparse. A bed, a chair, a table with a half-eaten meal on it. The walls were bare. It looked like a place someone existed in but didn't live. I heard you came back, Caleb said. I wasn't sure if you'd want to see me. I didn't, but here I am. They stood in awkward silence. Mara had imagined this conversation 1,000 times over the past 3 years. All the things she'd say, all the ways she'd make him understand what he'd done. But now, standing in front of him, most of those words felt meaningless. "I'm sorry." Caleb's voice cracked. "I know that doesn't mean anything, but I need to say it. I'm sorry for what I did, for what I failed to do." "Why?" Mara asked. "Why did you do it?" "I was scared." The twins looked so different, and people were already talking, and I thought if I didn't act first, if I didn't separate myself from the situation, they'd come after me too. Take the land, destroy my family's name. I was your family. I know that now. But at the time I was thinking about property, about legacy, about what my father would have wanted. I was thinking about everything except what was right. You chose land over people, over your wife, over your children. Yes. He said it simply, no excuses. I did. And now? Now I live with it, every day. I wake up and remember what I threw away, what I destroyed out of cowardice and greed. The trial exposed everything, how I was part of it, how the system used me, how I let them use me. I lost the land anyway, lost everything. Good. He flinched but nodded. I deserve that. Mara looked around the shabby room. Is this it? This is your life now? This is what I have left. I work at the mill, make enough to rent this room and eat. That's all I need. Do you want to see them? Mara asked. The twins? Hope flashed across Caleb's face, so naked and desperate it almost hurt to look at. You'd let me? I'm asking if you want to. That's different from saying yes. I want to, more than anything. I think about them every day, wonder what they look like, how they've grown, if they hate me. They don't know you enough to hate you. You're just a story I tell them, a cautionary tale about weakness and wrong choices. Caleb's face crumpled. I understand. They asked about you, on the way here, asked what you were like before everything went wrong. What did you tell them? That you were ordinary, not particularly cruel, not particularly kind, just a man who made the worst possible choice when it mattered most. That's fair. Mara moved toward the door. She'd gotten what she came for, not closure exactly, but confirmation. Caleb was broken, diminished, living with consequences. There was nothing left to fight. I'm not going to let you see them, she said. The hope died in his eyes. You gave up that right when you chose property over family. You don't get to waltz back in now that the hard part is over, now that I've kept them alive and safe without any help from you. I understand. His voice was barely audible. But I want you to know they're fine. Better than fine. They're smart and strong and they know their worth. I made sure of that. Thank you. Tears were running down Caleb's face now. Thank you for telling me. Mara left without saying goodbye. Walked down the stairs and out into the street where the sun was setting and casting everything in shades of amber and shadow. She felt empty. Not satisfied, not vindicated. Just empty. Gideon was waiting with the twins near the wagon. He took one look at her face and asked, You all right? I will be. That night they camped on the outskirts of Coldwater Ridge, not wanting to stay in town. Gideon built a fire while Mara set up the bedrolls. The twins were quiet, sensing that their mother needed space. After they'd eaten and the twins had fallen asleep, Mara sat staring into the flames. Gideon settled beside her. You see what you needed to see? He asked. I saw Caleb. He's broken, living in a room above a saddle shop, working at the mill. The trial destroyed him. Good. That's what I said. Mara picked up a stick, poked at the fire. But it didn't feel good. It just felt empty. Revenge usually does. Is that what this was? Revenge? Part of it. You took down the system that hurt you, exposed the men who participated. That's revenge, even if it came wrapped in justice and legal proceedings. Mara considered that. I thought I'd feel more satisfied. You feel something else instead. Tired. And ready to move on. She looked at him. I don't want the cabin. I don't want any connection to this place. I just want to take the compensation money and go somewhere new, somewhere we can start over without ghosts. That's wise. Is it? Or is it running away? Both.
But sometimes running toward something new is better than staying tied to something old. Gideon added wood to the fire. Where would you go? I don't know. West, maybe?
Oregon Territory. Somewhere they're still building, still figuring out what kind of society they want to be. That's a long journey. I've made longer. Gideon smiled faintly. You'd need help. Someone who knows the trails, who can handle trouble if it comes. Are you volunteering? Might be. Mara looked at him. This gruff, damaged man who'd saved her life and asked nothing in return, who'd taught her to fight with paper instead of bullets, who'd become the closest thing to family she had besides her children. Come with us, she said. Help us build something new. I'm not good at building. I'm better at tearing down. Then learn. We'll all learn together. He was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire. Then, all right, I'll come. They returned to Ashford a week later. Mara immediately wrote to the territorial court, declining ownership of the cabin and instructing them to sell it. Whatever proceeds came from the sale would be added to her compensation fund. The response came a month later. The cabin had sold quickly to a young family from the east. The compensation total, including the sale and her portion of the seized assets, came to an amount that made Mara's hands shake when she read it. It was enough to buy land. Real land, uncontested and clean. Enough to build a proper house, buy livestock, start a farm. Enough to send the twins to school, to give them opportunities she'd never had. It was a fortune built on trauma, and Mara hated that. But she'd take it anyway. She'd earned it in blood and fear and years stolen from her life. We're leaving, she told Lena that night, taking the money and heading west. Lena nodded like she'd been expecting this. When? 2 months. Soon as we can get supplies together and book passage on a wagon train. You'll write to me. Let me know you made it. I will. And if you ever need anything, money, help, a place to come back to, you let me know. Mara hugged her, this hard-faced woman who'd given her shelter when she had nothing. Thank you for everything. You did the hard part yourself. I just gave you a room. You gave me more than that. You gave me time and space to heal. The preparations took longer than 2 months. There was gear to buy, arrangements to make, decisions about what to bring and what to leave behind. The twins were excited and anxious in equal measure, excited about the adventure, anxious about leaving the only home they really remembered. Gideon sold his rental cabin and bought a sturdy horse, supplies, weapons. He was practical about it, the way he was about everything, making lists and checking them twice. They joined a wagon train heading west in late August. 60 families, all heading toward Oregon Territory for various reasons. Some were farmers seeking better land. Some were merchants hoping to establish new businesses. Some, like Mara, were running from pasts that had become too heavy to carry. The journey was hard. Harder than Mara had expected, though she'd known it wouldn't be easy. The trails were rough, the weather unpredictable. They forded rivers that nearly swept the wagons away. They crossed deserts that tested everyone's endurance. People got sick, animals died, tensions ran high. But the twins thrived. Rhea especially loved the travel, the constant movement, the new sights every day. She made friends with other children on the train, led them in elaborate games, got into minor trouble that Mara had to smooth over. Elias was quieter, more introspective. He watched everything, asked thoughtful questions, helped Gideon with tasks that required careful attention. He was growing into someone serious and considered, the kind of person who thought before acting. Mara watched them both with a mixture of pride and heartbreak. They were so young to have experienced so much, but they were also resilient in ways that astonished her. 4 months into the journey, they reached Oregon Territory. The wagon train split up, families heading to different areas based on where they'd claimed land or had connections. Mara had done her research before leaving. She'd identified a region near a river, far enough from established settlements to offer privacy, but close enough for trade and community. Good soil, timber rights, water access, everything they'd need to build a real life. She bought 50 acres outright with the compensation money, had the deed drawn up in her name alone, not as a wife, not as a dependent, but as an independent property owner. The first time in her life she'd owned something that couldn't be taken away. They built a house, not a cabin this time, but a real house. 2 stories, 4 rooms, windows that let in light and air. A porch where they could sit in the evenings. a root cellar for storage, a barn for animals they'd buy once they were settled. It took a year. They did most of the work themselves, with Gideon providing expertise and muscle. Neighbors helped too, families from the wagon train who'd settled nearby, people who appreciated hard work and asked few questions about where Mara had come from or why she was raising children alone. When the house was finally finished, Mara stood in the main room and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not happiness exactly, but satisfaction. The deep, bone-level satisfaction of having created something solid and real. "What do you think?" she asked the twins. Rhea spun in a circle, arms outstretched. "It's perfect! Can I pick which room is mine?" "You and Elias can decide together." Elias was running his hand along the walls, testing the joints. "It's well built, strong." Gideon made sure of that. "Where's his room?" "He built himself a workshop behind the main house, says he needs his own space." "Will he stay?" Elias asked. "Or will he leave once we're settled?" It was a question Mara had been avoiding. "I don't know, but I hope he stays." Gideon did stay. He built his workshop, set up his tools, started making furniture to sell in the nearest town. He ate dinner with them most nights, but retreated to his own space when the noise of family got too much. It was an odd arrangement, but it worked. Mara had her independence, her own household. The twins had a stable home, a mother who was present and attentive. And Gideon had the balance he needed between solitude and connection. Months turned into years. The farm grew profitable. Mara raised chickens, sold eggs and produce to neighboring families and to merchants in town. She hired workers during harvest season, paid them fair wages, treated them with respect. The twins grew. By age 10, they were both fluent readers, educated beyond what most frontier children could claim. Mara had bought books, as many as she could afford, and made education a priority. She wanted them to have choices, opportunities, ways to succeed beyond hard labor. Elias showed an aptitude for law and governance. He read everything he could find about territorial law, about court systems, about how societies organize themselves. At 12, he announced he wanted to go to college, to study law formally. Mara's first reaction was fear. College meant sending him away, losing him to a world she didn't understand. But she swallowed that fear and said yes. If he wanted education, she'd find a way to make it happen. Rhea was different. She had no interest in formal education beyond the basics. She wanted to work the land, to build things with her hands, to create and manage. At 14, she was already running half the farm operations, negotiating contracts with buyers, making decisions about crop rotation and resource allocation. They were so different, these two children who'd been born together in a snowstorm, but both carried the same core of stubborn resilience, the same refusal to be dismissed or underestimated. When Elias was 16, Mara arranged for him to attend a college back east. It took most of her remaining savings and required calling in favors from people she'd met through business dealings, but she made it happen. The day he left was one of the hardest of Mara's life. She stood on the porch of the house they'd built together, watching her son ride away toward a future she couldn't fully imagine, and had to remind herself that this was victory. This was what she'd fought for. The freedom for her children to choose their own paths. Rhea stood beside her, unusually quiet. "He'll come back, right?" "For visits. But his life is going to be different from ours. Bigger. Doesn't mean better." "No, just different." With Elias gone, the house felt emptier. But Rhea filled the space with her energy, her constant projects, her refusal to sit still. She expanded the farm, bought adjacent property when it became available, built relationships with merchants 3 towns over. At 18, she was managing an operation that employed 6 people seasonally and generated enough income that Mara could finally stop worrying about money. "You should rest," Rhea told her one evening. "You've been working for 20 years. Let me handle things." "I'm not that old." "You're not young either, and you've earned the right to slow down." Mara couldn't argue with that. She was in her early 40s now, and the years of hard labor, both physical and emotional, had taken their toll. Her hands ached in the mornings. Her back hurt after long days. She started stepping back, letting Rhea take the lead. It was harder than she expected, relinquishing control, but also liberating. She'd spent so long fighting, surviving, building. Maybe it was time to just exist. Elias came home for summers. Each time he returned, he seemed older, more polished, more sophisticated. He talked about constitutional law, about territorial governance, about theories of justice and society that went over Mara's head. But he was still her son, still asked her opinion on important matters, still deferred to her wisdom, even as he surpassed her education. "I want to work in territorial administration," he told her during one visit. "Help build the systems that prevent what happened to us from happening to others." That's ambitious. Someone has to do it. Might as well be someone who understands what happens when systems fail. Mara looked at her son, this serious, thoughtful young man who'd been marked for erasure before he was even born, and felt a surge of fierce pride. "You'll be good at it," she said. "You'll be better than good. I learned from the best. You learned from Gideon, and from necessity. I learned from you. How to fight without violence, how to use truth as a weapon, how to build something that can't be torn down." Time kept moving. Ria got married at 22 to a man who worked one of the neighboring farms. He was quiet and steady, the kind of person who complemented her intensity. They built a house on the edge of Mara's property, close enough to help with the farm, but far enough to have their own life. Elias took a position with the territorial government at 24. He worked on land disputes, property law, reforms to the documentation systems that had enabled so much fraud. He was making a difference, even if the changes were slow and incremental. Gideon was still there, older now, moving slower, but still sharp, still present. He'd become part of the family without anyone quite noticing when it happened. The twins called him Gideon, not uncle or any formal title, but the affection was clear. Mara was 48 when the second letter from Coldwater Ridge arrived. It came on a spring morning, delivered by the postal rider who made rounds through the rural areas once a week. Mara almost didn't recognize the seal at first. It had been so many years since she'd had any contact with that place. She opened it with Ria and Gideon watching. Inside was a formal letter from the new town council of Coldwater Ridge. They acknowledged the wrongs that had been committed. They offered a formal public apology, and they asked if Mara would be willing to have her story documented for the historical record, preserved so that future generations would know what had been done and what it had taken to make it right. Mara read it 3 times. "What are you going to tell them?" Ria asked. "I don't know yet." "You should say yes," Gideon said. "Stories like yours need to be told. Otherwise, people forget. And forgetting is how it happens again." "I don't want to relive it. I don't want to dig up all that pain." "You don't have to relive it. Just record it. For the children who come after, the ones who need to know they're not alone." Mara thought about that, about all the other women and families who'd been erased, whose stories had disappeared because no one documented them, about the children still being marked and removed in other towns, under other systems. "All right," she said, "I'll do it." She wrote back that same day, accepted the apology, though she noted it came decades too late for most of the victims, agreed to documentation with the condition that other victims' stories be included, that the names of the marked children be recorded even if their full stories were lost. She wanted a complete record, not just her triumph, but everyone's suffering. 3 months later, a historian arrived from the Territorial University, a young woman named Margaret Chen who carried notebooks and recording equipment and an earnest desire to get the story right. Mara sat with her for 3 weeks, told her everything: the exile, the survival, the investigation, the trial, the years of rebuilding, the cost of fighting back. Margaret asked good questions, didn't flinch at the hard parts, took detailed notes and verified everything Mara said against court records and testimony. "This is important," Margaret said on the last day. "Not just as history, but as precedent. You proved that systems can be challenged, that the powerful can be held accountable." "I got lucky. I had help. Most people don't." "That's true. But you also refused to give up. That matters." When Margaret left, Mara felt drained, like she'd opened old wounds and let them bleed again, but also lighter, like she'd set down a burden she'd been carrying for 30 years. "You did good," Gideon told her that evening. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sun set over the land they'd built together. "Did I? I'm not sure what good it does telling old stories. It reminds people that fighting back is possible, that survival isn't the same as giving up." Mara leaned back in her chair. "I'm tired, Gideon. Bone tired. I've been fighting for so long, I'm not sure I know how to stop. Then stop. You've earned it. Have I? Look around. He gestured at the house, the land, the life they'd built. You took nothing and made it into this. You took 2 children who were marked for death and raised them into adults who are changing the world. If that's not earning rest, I don't know what is. Mara looked at her friend because that's what he was, despite all his gruff resistance to sentiment. What about you? Have you earned rest? I'm resting. This is my rest. Building furniture, eating dinner with you and whoever's around, existing without constantly looking over my shoulder. He smiled faintly. It's more than I thought I'd get. We're a pair, aren't we? 2 broken people who somehow made something whole. Seems like. They sat in comfortable silence until the stars came out. Years continued to pass. Mara slowed down more, let Rhea and her husband run the farm entirely. Elias rose through the territorial administration, eventually becoming a judge himself. He handled land disputes and property cases with a fairness that earned him respect and enemies in equal measure. Both of her children had families now. Grandchildren came, 4 in total. They ran through the house that Mara had built, their laughter filling spaces that had once been empty and cold. Mara was 62 when Gideon died, peacefully, in his sleep, in the workshop he'd built. He'd been 78 and had lived longer than anyone expected, given the hard life he'd led. They buried him on the property, under a tree he'd planted years ago. Elias came back for the funeral. The twins, not so much twins anymore as 2 middle-aged adults, stood on either side of Mara and held her hands as the local minister said words over the grave. He was a good man, Elias said afterward. He was a complicated man, Mara corrected. But yes, good in the ways that mattered. He saved us. We saved each other. After Gideon's death, Mara found herself thinking more about the past, not dwelling on it, but reflecting, taking stock. She'd lived a long life, a hard life, but also a full one. She'd been exiled, marked for death, written off as nothing, and she'd refused to disappear, refused to accept the story others tried to write for her. She'd fought with the only weapons available: patience, documentation, truth. She'd built a case so airtight that even a corrupt system couldn't ignore it. She'd exposed the machinery that had tried to crush her and watched it collapse under the weight of its own lies. And then she'd built something new, something clean, something that couldn't be taken away. She was 70 when a young couple came to visit. They'd traveled from Coldwater Ridge specifically to meet her. The woman was pregnant, and they'd heard Mara's story, read it in the historical archives, and wanted to thank her. Thank me for what? Mara asked. For showing us it's possible, to fight back, to win. The woman's hand rested on her belly. We were having problems. My husband's family was trying to claim our child before it was even born, saying he wasn't the father, that I'd been unfaithful. They wanted to use it as grounds to take our property. Let me guess, your property is valuable. Very. Water rights and timber. Mara nodded. Same story, different generation. What did you do? We documented everything, got independent witnesses, filed a preemptive case with the territorial court, used your story as precedent. The young husband spoke up now. They backed down when they realized we weren't going to be easy victims. Good. Mara felt a warmth spread through her chest. That's very good. We named our daughter after you, if that's all right. Mara's eyes stung. That's more than all right. They stayed for dinner. Mara told them stories, not just about the fight, but about what came after, about building the farm, raising children, creating a life worth defending. The fight is important, she said, but what you build after is just as important. Don't spend so much time looking back that you forget to look forward. They left the next morning, promising to write. Mara stood on the porch and watched them go, these young people who'd learned from her story and applied it to their own lives. That was legacy. Not property or money or monuments, but the knowledge that what you'd survived and how you'd fought back could help others survive and fight in their turn. She was 74 when she started having trouble with her heart. The doctor said it was years of stress, of hard living, of a body pushed beyond its limits too many times. How long? Mara asked. Could be a year, could be 5. Bodies are unpredictable.
Mara went home and told Rhea and Elias they wanted her to slow down even more, to rest completely. She refused. I've been resting for 10 years. I'm not spending whatever time I have left sitting in a chair waiting to die. Instead, she worked on organizing her papers. All the documents she'd collected over the years, all the evidence from the original case, all her notes and letters. She donated them to the Territorial Archives to be preserved for researchers and historians. "This is your life's work," the archivist said when accepting the collection. "No, my life's work is out there." Mara gestured toward the window, toward the farm, and the family she'd built. "These are just the receipts." She lived 4 more years, good years mostly. Years of watching her grandchildren grow, of seeing Elias appointed to the Territorial Supreme Court, of seeing Rhea expand the farm into one of the most successful operations in the region. Years of sitting on that porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over land she owned free and clear, knowing that no one could take it away. She was 78 when she died. Peacefully, in her sleep, in the house she'd built with her own hands and determination. They buried her next to Gideon, under the trees they'd planted together. The funeral was large. Neighbors, friends, colleagues of her children, families who'd been helped by her story. Elias gave the eulogy. He talked about his mother's strength, her refusal to be erased, her commitment to truth and justice. He talked about what she'd taught them, not just her children, but everyone who'd known her story. She was marked for death before she was old enough to understand what that meant, he said. The system wanted her gone, wanted her children gone, wanted us erased like we'd never existed. But she refused. She survived. She fought. She won. Not with violence, not with revenge, but with patience and documentation and an absolute refusal to let them rewrite her story. She built something that couldn't be torn down, not just property or wealth, but a legacy. A reminder that no matter how powerful the system, individuals still matter, truth still matters, justice is still possible. She taught us that power isn't taken, it's built. One choice at a time, one truth at a time, one act of defiance against those who would erase you. He paused, looking at the faces gathered around the grave. My mother used to say that the best revenge isn't destruction, it's creation. Building something so strong, so real, that all the lies in the world can't erase it. She did that. She built a life, a family, a legacy that will outlast all of us. And in doing so, she proved that no one, no matter how powerful, has the right to say you don't exist. Mara Vance existed. She fought. She won. And her story will live on long after the people who tried to erase her are forgotten. The crowd was silent. Then, one by one, people stepped forward, laid flowers on the grave, shared their own stories of how Mara had helped them, inspired them, shown them what was possible. It took hours. The sun was setting by the time the last person left. Elias and Rhea stood alone by the grave. The twins, now in their 50s, gray-haired themselves but still carrying the fierce determination their mother had instilled in them. She would have hated this, Rhea said. All the attention. No, she would have tolerated it. There's a difference. Think we did right by her? Elias looked at the farm stretching out around them, the house still standing strong, the land still productive, the family still growing. Yeah, he said. I think we did. They stood there until the stars came out. 2 people who'd been born wrong in the eyes of a corrupt system and had grown into adults who'd helped change that system. Their mother had given them that. Not safety, not ease, but the knowledge that they had a right to exist, that their story mattered, that they could fight back and win, and that was worth more than all the land and money in the world. In the end, Mara Vance's victory wasn't the trial or the compensation or even the apology. It was this: a life lived fully and freely, a family that thrived, a story that refused to be erased. She'd been written off as nothing, and she'd written herself back into existence. One word, one day, one stubborn act of survival at a time. That was power. That was freedom. That was victory.